What music they make.
Metal Global.
Sejam bem-vindos a mais um podcast de Metal Global. Hoje a conversa é com Chris Naughton dos Winterfylleth. A banda de Manchester editou o seu novo trabalho, The Unyielding Season, que foi editado, curiosamente, hoje, dia 27 de março, pela Napalm Records. Antes de avançar com a entrevista com o Chris, não quero mais lembrar que tem a versão rádio exclusiva na RTP Play. É passar por lá e procurar por Metal Global. Ora bem, a Napalm Records assinou contrato com os lendários britânicos de black metal Winterfylleth e o novo trabalho de Unyielding Season é lançado hoje, dia 27 de março de 2026. Para falar sobre esta novidade, a conversa é com o vocalista Chris Naughton. Sem mais demoras, Winterfylleth no Metal Global.
Hello.
Not anymore. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Everything is good. Busy days?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, but it's been okay.
Yeah.
So here I am. Well, I have a young son, and they are on holiday from school this week. So
Okay.
he is. Yeah, it's been a lot today.
Oh well, that happens. Anyway, and before we talk about the new Winterfylleth record, the Unyielding Season, let's go back a couple of years. In Dublin, March 2024, you guys opened for Emperor. How was that night for you guys?
Fantastic. Yeah, it's really great. Obviously, when you get to open for one of your heroes and a band that are one of the the biggest, if not the biggest, black metal band, then I think it's a really great stage to be able to play on. Obviously the venue, I don't know if you've seen the venue, the one in Dublin particularly was this amazing ornate theatre, and it's great when you're not as big a band as them like we are, then you don't always get to play on those kind of stages. The music that we're all doing, I think, has this really evocative atmosphere, and it's very requiring of the right places to play it, I think. And sometimes you can't always have that when you're playing in a club show to 400 or 500 people, so it's nice to be able to access those atmospheric and evocative and grand stages like that. And I think it really brings a different dynamic to black metal music for fans. So yeah, it was fantastic, and since then, we've played with, Ishan a few times and gotten to know Vigard a little bit. So it's really, really nice that, after so many years, we can start doing those kind of things.
Yeah, I was there in Dublin. I was photographing the show. So
I mean, well, then you were there, you saw it.
It was a great night.
I think also it's interesting for a lot of, metal fans, black metal fans, to see shows in those places as well. Because if you're a fan of, largely underground music like black metal or death metal or doom metal or whatever it might be, then you don't always get to see performances in those kind of spaces, do you? It's normally in, a sticky floored rock club or something. So it's nice to see it on a stage where it matters.
Yeah, it was a great night, that one. And for the new record, when you guys actually start working on songs for the new album, I know when you guys played, I think you already had like one or two new songs going around or something. I'm not sure. I had that idea, but when did you guys start working on songs for the new record?
Quite soon after the last one, to be honest. So when we were playing with Emperor, we were just about to release our previous record, The Imperious Horizon, with the snowy mountain on the front. And then we started on this one maybe May 2025 or something like that. So we released the last one before that in September 24. And, we had some kind of sort of differences with our previous label, and so we moved from Candlelight Records, and we're now on Napalm Records.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to wait for ages, announce that we signed to Napalm and then wait 2 years to put out an album or something. So we had 3 or 4 songs left from the writing session of the previous album, and so we wrote another 6 or so. and then, you know, made a new album from that. And the reason why we kind of left the ones off the last album was because they had a different concept. And so it just felt like we could bring them into this one, and that'd just be interesting for us to do something else, and, you know, for a kind of quick release, I guess, you know, 18 months after the last one. So, you know, I think it's still a good one, and I hope people connect with it. And I think it's interesting to be on a different label now. So I'm kind of interested, excited to sort of see how that gets communicated to people.
Is it, you feel pressure at all, or it's just another day in the office for you?
I don't feel pressure from the outside. I don't, you know, I think we've been a band long enough now, and I think we've got a loyal enough fan base that we could potentially do, you know, some different things. And I think that the only kind of pressure we have, I guess, is that, you know, like everybody says, the pressure that you put on yourself. You want to make great records. You want them to have, you know, be memorable songs, be songs that affect people, songs that kind of, you know, touch people's lives and their hearts and things like this. And when you've had a history of doing that, I think you then are like, right, we need to keep doing that. You know, you can't like do a great record and then just drop off. And I worry because some bands who, you know, are really kind of focused on their band as their only livelihood, then I think sometimes you can get in this cycle of we do a tour, we tour for 1.5 years, and then we've got 5 weeks to make a brand new album. And I think we don't work that way. So for us, we can take as much or as little time as we need to make a new one. And I think that really helps, because it means you have the time and the space and the energy to make it great, and to ask questions of yourself and not just put your first ideas out. Because I think a lot of bands get stuck in that cycle. You know, we need a new record by this time so we can play the summer festivals, and so we've got something to tour and all this sort of stuff. And actually that can be the enemy of great music sometimes. You know that some of these bands are capable of 10 out of 10 records. Yeah. And yet maybe they make a 7 out of 10 record because that's the circumstances that they're living in, you know? Yeah.
I'm old. I'm from the day where bands would release almost an album every year, and they would have like 2 hit singles, and then the rest was filler. I'm not talking about Kiss. I could be talking about Kiss, but, you know, there are bands that, you know, they normally would have like a couple of really good songs, but you would sense the rest of the record was just, you know, to feel it. In your case, I mean, it's extreme music. It's not like you don't have the need to put your music on the radio. You don't have the pressure of a hit single. But I think,
I guess, but then these days, you know, who listens to radio anymore? Yeah. I think with, you know, streaming services and playlists and things like that, like radio must be less and less important these days, I think. Maybe for, you know, older people who grew up with it, perhaps it's still important, but not the younger people, I don't think.
Yeah. No, I think here in Portugal we have like, you know, the numbers of the radio, it's actually going up. The number of listeners, it's actually increasing. But I think it's just normally the morning show and then the drive home kind of things that people listen. And with, as you mentioned, streaming and with podcasts and stuff, now every show is a podcast. I mean, you can have a morning show and have everything and a couple of hours later as a podcast, which kind of defeats the purpose of a podcast, you know.
Well, this is it, you know, when something becomes popular, everyone tries to do it, don't they? And so you end up with 10,000 podcasts that get, you know, 100 listeners rather than 1 or 2 really great stations or broadcasters, you know. So it just speaks to the nature of the world, doesn't it? Everything is so fragmented now. And I think that's one of the challenges of being an artist as well, that the records used to kind of have 4, 5, 6 months where they were kind of, you know, popular and being talked about. Now it's like a week.
If you're lucky.
And it's very difficult, you know, it sort of you don't really know what the best thing to do is.
Yeah.
And I think maybe perhaps like you know, I come from a generation who still enjoys the concept of an album and the journey of the songs, and you know, it being something to sort of sit down with the artwork and the lyrics, and you know, sit in your house with your, I don't know, your vinyl setup or your CD setup, and really kind of sit there and listen to it. And I think that to some extent has departed, you know, and people don't always want the same thing from it. So it's hard to be an artist that lives in that frame of mind and exists in the world where, you know, music is 2-minute clips on TikTok or whatever. I just think it's a crazy time to be an artist, you know.
I you know, it's something as a old person, old school guy, it really breaks my heart seeing that music is not appreciated as a whole, you know, and seeing like someone, let's say an artist puts a single out for a week or whatever, people are just talking about that song, and all of a sudden it's gone. You know,
it is. It's true. But what do you do? You know, because I follow these things, and we work with PR people, and we, you know, like you will do. And I think if you're a radio station, it's fine, maybe, you know, that you want new things to play to your listeners, and you want to be at the front of what's happening in metal and rock and whatever else. But the reality is 70, 80, 100 records come out every Friday. And it's like, how are you supposed to, how is anybody supposed to get into any of those albums? You know, by the time the vinyl arrives, there's been 3 more Fridays, and you've had, you know, 200 more records you can potentially listen to. Yeah,
it's insane. I really try to focus on just stuff that I enjoy. I know it's kind of rude for other artists that put singles and albums out, but I really have to focus on, you know, bands that I know that I'm going to enjoy. Otherwise, you know, I cannot. It's, as you said, it's so many. On Friday, I always dread the mailbox. I mean, it's just so many press releases, and I'm like, what is happening? You know, I have a whole freaking week, and you're just putting everything out on Friday. It's insane, you know. But it's a lot, and I don't know. I think technology kind of helped, good or bad, to, you know, for a lot of bands to put stuff out, because, you know, you can record stuff at home, like with a great sound, and be able to put it out. It's, you know, I don't know.
But then obviously, as a consequence of that, it's very hard to be in a band that's bigger than just a certain level. You know, if you want to get to, I don't know, the level of some of the breakthrough bands, you know, you just think about the whole of metal, like how many bands have really gone from being small to huge in the last 20 years? It's not very many. You know, bands like, even though they're not my favorite, you know, bands like Sleep Token, for example, who've come out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden they're
gigantic,
they're headlining arenas and things like this, you know, and you just think like, how, why, you know, like, what is it about that's kind of jumped through? But then it's almost harder to be big in the modern era, you know, and I think with all the bands like, I don't know, Slayer and Metallica and Megadeth talking about retiring or scaling back, like who's going to be the bands that headline the festivals in 5 years, 10 years? You know, it's quite a strange landscape to be in, I think, because it doesn't feel like any bands from this era can ever get that big again, because there's just so many smaller or mid-sized bands that it's, you know, I feel sorry for people starting bands now, because it's so hard to be heard.
And you have promoters already having those issues for festivals to try to book like a band that can really sell out something big, like a stadium or an arena, whatever it is. You know, you have, I mean, here in Portugal, we have those issues now, like because, and then you have, you know, obviously the main festivals, Hellfest, Download, Grasspop, whatever other bigger festivals there is in Europe. They normally get, you know, the best bands, and then, you know, to come to the end of Europe, it becomes very difficult to get those bands in.
But think about how many bands are on Hellfest. It's probably like 600 bands or something, isn't it? You know, it's like
I don't know.
Every possible genre. There's like a rock and punk and stoner and black metal and mainstream metal and all these kind of things. And it's just like, there is something for everybody. And I guess because they've gotten so big, I think you can you can book big things across different genres. But if you're trying to start a small festival in the UK or Portugal or wherever it is, it's impossible, isn't it?
Yeah, but you have to do, I think the way to go for me would be like one day really strong lineup festival. And I mean, and just one stage. I hate when you have so many stages. I went in 2015 to download, and I swore never again to step foot on it. Not because it's a bad festival, it's just so many stuff happening at the same time. You cannot enjoy anything. I had a band on the main stage, then I had to run to the tent to try to catch up another good band, and then I had to run again to the other second main stage that was, I don't know how many kilometers away.
Yeah, it's far, isn't it? I agree. It's not like you can just set off 5 minutes before the set time and just, walk there. It's like, it's half a kilometer or a kilometer or something to the next stage, isn't it? It's far.
It's crazy. I did that 3 days and I was like, never again. And I never went there again. But like a festival like Bloodstock, for instance, is great because everything is really close by and that festival you can enjoy. So I don't know. Anyway, going back to the record, you mentioned like there was a few songs that didn't fit the concept from the previous record. So what is the concept of the Unyielding season?
It's, as with all the records, I think, they are a moment in time. They are, I guess, our reflection on the current state of the world in a way. And we've always had this style, this way of approaching things where I'm really interested in the old history of our country. I'm really interested in the old poetry and the writing and the old texts and some of the interesting elements of history. When I look at those things, I find there are often parallels with the current state of the world. You read the old English codices of poetry, for example, and they talk about struggle, they talk about battle, they talk about fighting against oppression or against, people falling out, battles, whatever it might be. There's all this kind of stuff that sort of exists in there that really has a sort of link to the modern world. And so I've always had this idea of trying to communicate the struggles and the issues and the state of the world as it is now, but sort of using some of that old kind of elegant writing to be a nice, form of lyrics, I guess, as well. Because I think with this kind of music, it has to be atmospheric, it has to be emotional, it has to be evocative. And so I think you need the words and the music to sort of make that mental picture for people. And then when it comes to the concept of this album, if I think about the last one was like a snow-capped mountain with like mist and fog. And my concept of that was, it feels like there's some kind of evil, some kind of lurking power that's just kind of over the horizon, that's kind of yet to show itself. And I think everyone felt like the world was quite a dangerous and emotional and conflicted place, 2 or 3 years ago. And now I think it's no less bad, but some of these things have kind of come out. And so I guess when I talk about the Unyielding season, I sort of try to frame it like, if you're a normal person living in the world as I am, as you are, there's all these things all the time. It just makes you think, like, what are our leaders doing? Like, what is the state of the world? Like, what is the agenda here? Because if I think about the UK, there's some crazy stuff in recent years. So there's like, particularly around people's personal freedom and their ability to exist happily and to exist, with each other. Obviously, like, there's the whole political strain of the left versus the right and all of this stuff. But it's not even about that. I think it's not about a branch of politics. It's about the sort of human aspect of this, which is, if you live in the UK, but this could be any other country, the government, who are supposed to be the nice people, they've been talking about things like mandatory digital ID cards for people to be able to use the health service, to be able to access things. And they talk about it like, oh, this is going to make everyone's life really easy. But then you can it doesn't take a big jump to be like, right, so a few years' time, oh, well, if you haven't behaved or if you haven't done this, then your digital ID says you can't travel or you can't go on a plane and so I just think that's a worry. Then I think there's things like when it comes to the criminal system, the government have been talking about like removing juries from criminal trials and things like this. And I think that's it's not a particularly great thing either. There's all this crazy stuff in the UK now. We have like anti-protest laws that prevent people from protesting in government. Yeah. There's like the Online Safety Act, which is like about restricting access to the internet for safety for kids and things. But then even if that is true, it's then set a little precedent. Oh, well, we don't think anyone should look at this, or you can't look at that website. And I just worry that it kind of gives government this overreach and this authoritarianism. And so I suppose the point about the Unyielding season was, it feels like to me, there's all these things all the time, and almost like the world is on fire with all these kind of crazy things that are happening to everybody. And so the idea being that, metaphorically, we should sort of like reject these ideas, like burn down this crazy totalitarian authoritarianism that seems to be kind of coming into the world. And so it feels unyielding because it's just constant. There's always something in the news every day. And so I just had this idea that almost the world is like this wildfire of just everything all the time. And if you're a normal person who just wants their children to go to school, who just wants to exist in the world and hang out with their friends and go and watch a concert and eat nice food and be safe, those don't feel like crazy things to want. And yet the world is this wildfire. And so the really evocative cover image, the whole thing, that's kind of how I've got to this kind of concept at the end. And so while there's like a political aspect to it, maybe, I don't think it's party politics. I think it's human politics almost. Yeah,
but it's crazy that, not that many years ago, our thinking political sides, left and right, were, they were like respectable politicians not that long ago. And now everything seems like so strained, so divisive, that it's like, it seems like, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of politicians, but, I'm from a time where they actually had like degrees in whatever, law, economics. And nowadays, if you can really speak well on a microphone, it's what you get.
Well, this is the thing, our politicians are no longer statesmen, are they? They're just anybody. It's a popularity contest, isn't it? And I think that's the worst thing. If you look at some of the politics of the world, it's not ruled by sense and common sense and things that are better for people. It's about who is the most popular on the internet or whatever. And I think that's a really bad way for us to manage our world. And hence why you see it's been so bad for the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. Even in Portugal is the same. I mean...
Everywhere is. This is the thing. Everywhere is. And this is the kind of universal human truth I think I want to try and get to with this. I'm looking at this from a UK perspective, but I speak to journalists from Germany last week, from Sweden, from Czech, from wherever else I spoke to, and now you from Portugal. And does it feel any differently for you?
No, it's crazy. I mean, I just really want to... What I do, it's every time I have the chance to go to a show, I just go. That's my release. And I really avoid news, at this time, because it becomes so politicized in the sense of, we have like our news, the main news that starts at 8, they last for an hour and a half. And the first hour normally is just about Portuguese politics, and they repeat the same freaking stuff over and over again. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just too much. And we had because of the weather, we had very unfortunate for the center of Portugal. There was it was a disaster. And all of a sudden it seemed like what's happening in the Ukraine, doesn't exist anymore. Like other issues that they disappear and they just focus on one thing for, I don't know, as long as they can milk it, and then they're going to focus on another thing for another week or 2 weeks, and they forget about the world. And I don't know, it's crazy. I want out.
I agree, and I think everybody does, and so that's why I felt kind of compelled to write these stories. But it's not like this is the only record I've talked about this on. I think it's just been this evolving thing over the last 20 years since we've been a band. And I think people have always misunderstood me or us talking about that stuff. But the world has definitely changed a lot. And I think a lot more people are kind of pulling back and realizing that the world is this, like, there is beauty and there is hope and there is stuff in the world that's great. But there is this whole sphere of just madness that nobody wants to deal with.
I think social media, the way that, like reality shows that MTV started many years ago, and TV's just got it, like the Big Brothers and stuff. I really don't like that kind of stuff because it's absolutely meaningless. For me, I don't understand, and people talk about it like like I would be in school talking about science or geography and having debates about, whatever, social politics. And people are having these heated debates online about the Big Brother. I don't get it.
And it's stupid. Well, it's interesting what you say about the news. If you look, news is always classified as entertainment rather than as kind of fact.
Yeah.
And I think, it just makes me think, are we really getting anything good out of this? It just makes you worry that, like, you don't live in the same world as all this kind of crazy stuff that's going on. And actually, you just want to live a happy and good life. And there's just all this other stuff trying to make it not that. So, yeah, I hope that people start thinking about it. There's a song on the last record, which was called To the Edge of Tyranny. And it's about, like, how far can you push people? How far will people be pushed before they start, like, kind of pushing back? And I worry that too many of us are kind of apathetic and just don't want to think about it, that what's it going to take until this is, like, too far gone that we then, like, start rebelling. And I think there's this whole cycle in history of people, falling under bad leadership and, like, having to, like, rebel against it. And it just feels crazy that we, like, don't learn from these mistakes, like every 100 years or whatever it is, right? There's another dictator, there's another regime, there's another thing that the people have to overcome. And it's like, generally the people want to be free and exist in the world. And then there's always this,
there's always someone that doesn't like you to have fun.
In essence, yeah. And so I think that, black metal music is an interesting way to talk about that, because you can relate that to the sort of the natural world and the real world. And, it kind of paints this atmospheric picture, and hopefully the music captures the emotion and it makes people think. I think, punk music's obviously been good for that, and grind and things like that, talking about political issues as well. And it's just about the medium, isn't it? There's a lot more anger in that stuff. Whereas I think with the black metal stuff, it's a lot more kind of, it connects with you emotionally and spiritually maybe. So I hope that it makes people think about those things, because, I'd hate to be sat here in 2 or 3 years going, fucking hell, we thought it was bad in 2026. Actually, now it's,
Yeah. And you mentioned punk, right? I was just reading a comment today because of a band that's playing here. And some guy put a comment that's saying, like, since when punk bands have a political, view? And I was like, that's why
the whole point of punk is that,
I was reading absolutely. That. I was like, I cannot. What is happening with people? What is happening?
I think it's strange, isn't it? There's this young generation that just doesn't know all this history. And look, this is my whole point. If you don't know the history, then you don't know where you've come from. Then you don't know all the past struggles. And I think there's so much information all the time that's another problem. The post-truth reality, like what to believe. When you get overloaded with a million informations, you never know what to believe. I think it's almost making us dumber, having all this information all the time.
I think that's the problem. And, one of the things you mentioned, like, it was the lyrics, and you mentioned, like, the old English way of writing. Do you think it's kind of a lost art? It's the same in Portuguese, and I think it's the same in almost every language. We're kind of losing the art of writing poetry, make things sound beautiful. I think it's again, we're probably a bit dumber now than we were.
100%. Yeah. But it's not just writing, is it? It's everything. If you think about our architecture, if you think about all the old architecture, all the old buildings, beautiful stonework, ornate cathedrals that speak to the heavens, paintings, murals and fountains and things. Now everything is just like glass and clean, and there's no artistry to any of it. And I think the same is true with writing. We've got this social media world where people want to communicate faster with shorter and shorter words that mean things. And, in a sense, it's interesting that language has been able to be kind of squashed like that, to speak quickly. But also you lose the verbalism, the descriptive nature, and the kind of evocative nature of language. And so I think it is maybe a lost art. And, I think it's lost to the people who don't live in that world. They don't read books. They don't write like that. No one writes with a pen even anymore. It's all just email and, so... There's not all progress. I do.
I do write. I don't have any other way of thinking, and I'm doing just an English C1 English course, and I'm dreading having to do the exam on the computer because I cannot think writing. I cannot think with touching the keyboard. I need a pen and paper, and I'm dreading that day that I have to do it on the computer.
I bet.
It's going to be crazy. Anyway, Chris, before we go, and just quickly, the album comes out soon. Touring plans for you guys?
Yeah, the album comes out the 27th of March. We've got another single before that, Echoes in the After, which is track 2 on the album. And then after that, we have a tour quite quickly, actually. We're doing a tour with that band Black Braid from the USA. Don't know if you know them. And also a Spanish band called Noctem.
Yep.
So we're doing a UK and Ireland tour with those guys. So that's in April, the 9th to the 15th or 16th. And then we have a few weeks, and then we've got quite a few summer festivals. We're doing Hellfest, we're doing Mystic in Poland, we're doing Hole in the Sun Festival in Germany, and a few other things that are unannounced yet. I'm hoping we'll maybe be back into Central Europe towards the end of the year, or maybe the beginning of the year after. It depends, I guess, how everything works out. But there's lots of plans for the band, so we're still quite busy. The new album's out, and then next year, actually, as well as the new album being this year, next year is our 20 years of being a band. So I think we're going to do something to honor that as well. So the plans are kind of in place for the next few years. So I'm hoping we manage to get out to see people, and they'll come and see us.
Cool. All right, Chris, thank you very much for your time. All the best for Winterfylleth. Hope to see you guys in Portugal soon. I know you guys need to play Spain first and then come to Portugal. That's normally how it works. Or maybe a festival. There's quite a few here in Portugal, so maybe you can get lucky and play one of those.
Yeah, soon. I hope so. We played the Resurrection Festival in the north of Spain.
Yeah, and it's a few kilometers down. It's not that far.
And we've done some tours with your own guerrilla a few times as well. So there's potential we could do something like that. So never say never. I hope we can get there.
All right, Chris, thank you very much for your time. All the best, and hope to see you soon. All right, thank you.
Yes, man,
have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
De regresso ao Metal Global, foi a conversa com Chris Naughton dos Winterfylleth. O novo álbum de Unyielding Season já está nas lojas. E assim chega ao final deste podcast. Dúvidas ou sugestões? Podem enviar e-mail jorge.botas@rtp.pt. Visite o site metalglobal.pt e sigam-me no Twitter e Instagram em @mountainking. Podem fazer like na página de Facebook do Metal Global e, claro, tem esta versão podcast, tem Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, e se é numa destas plataformas que estão a ouvir, subscrevam para não perder nenhum episódio. Volto no próximo programa. Forte abraço.
Children of the night, you will live through the centuries to come, as I have lived. Good night.